My name is Michael Carter, and I am 28 years old. As I sit here in this quiet room at the rustic outdoor venue, adjusting my tie for what feels like the 100th time this morning, I can't escape the weight of everything that brought me to this moment. Today is my wedding day, and in just 2 hours, I will marry Sophia Ramirez, the woman who taught me that love doesn't require earning or proving, it simply is. The mirror reflects back a man who has learned to stand on his own, built from the ground up through sheer determination and countless nights of wondering if I was enough. I am a software engineer now, successful by any measure, living in a home I bought with money I earned through my own sweat and sleepless nights. Yet, even now, as I prepare for what should be the happiest day of my life, old wounds pulse beneath the surface, like phantom pain from a limb that was never quite right. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Growing up as the eldest son in the Carter household should have meant something. In most families, it would have meant leadership, responsibility, perhaps even a little extra pride from parents watching their firstborn take his first steps into the world. But in my family, being the older child meant being the practice round, the rough draft before the masterpiece that was my younger sister Lily. I remember one evening when I was 12 and Lily was 10. I had spent weeks working on a science project about renewable energy, staying up late building models and preparing presentations with the obsessive care that had always defined my approach to everything I touched. When I won second place at the school science fair, I burst through our front door with my certificate, heart pounding with the need to share this victory with the people who mattered most. "Dad, Mom, I won second place," I called out, my voice echoing through our suburban Texas home. My father, David, looked up from his newspaper with the mild interest one might show a neighbor commenting on the weather. "That's nice, Michael," he said, his attention already drifting back to the sports section. "Lily, come show your brother what you made in art class today." And just like that, my moment evaporated. Lily bounced into the room with a finger painting that looked like any other 10-year-old's artwork, and suddenly the living room filled with wonder and applause. My second-place certificate ended up forgotten in a drawer, while Lily's finger painting claimed the refrigerator door for months, a daily reminder of where my parents' hearts truly lived. This pattern carved itself deeper into my soul with each passing year, teaching me that love in the Carter household was not a river that flowed equally to all shores, but a spotlight that followed only one performer across the stage of our family life. The Carter household was a theater where favoritism played every night to an audience of one. From the outside, we looked perfect. A successful father who owned a thriving construction business, a devoted mother who managed our home with grace, and 2 children who should have been equally cherished. But behind those walls, I learned to navigate the treacherous geography of conditional love. Lily was sunshine incarnate, I'll admit that. At 8 years old, she could light up any room with her smile and charm her way out of trouble with a giggle and batting eyelashes. She was the kind of child that adults gravitated toward, the one who made everyone feel special just by paying attention to them. I was different, serious, thoughtful, the kind of child teachers called mature for his age, in voices that weren't entirely sure this was a compliment. I preferred books to playground games, found peace in puzzles and building projects, and asked questions that sometimes made adults shift uncomfortably in their chairs. The difference in our treatment became most obvious on birthdays. When Lily turned 9, our parents transformed our backyard into a carnival. They hired a clown, strung lights between the trees, and invited what seemed like her entire grade school class.
I watched from the kitchen window as she opened gift after carefully chosen gift, each one wrapped with the kind of attention that spoke of love made tangible. My 10th birthday came 4 months later with a small cake after dinner and a single present, a book about astronomy that I had mentioned wanting months earlier. Don't misunderstand me. I treasured that book and read it until the pages were soft as fabric. But the contrast was impossible to ignore, even for a 10-year-old desperately trying to convince himself that he didn't need fanfare to feel valued. My salvation came in the form of Grandpa William, my father's father, who lived in a small farmhouse on the outskirts of town. Every other weekend, when my parents wanted couple time and Lily had sleepovers with friends, I would pack my duffel bag and escape to his world, a place where I could breathe freely and feel seen for exactly who I was. Grandpa William had weathered hands that told stories of honest work, first as a ranch hand and later as a carpenter. He wore faded denim and boots that had walked more miles than most people's cars had driven. And he possessed the rare gift of listening that made you feel like the most important person in the universe. "Michael," he would say, as we sat on his porch, watching the Texas sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and gold. "Some folks are born to sparkle right out of the gate. Others are built for the long haul, like good oak furniture that gets more beautiful with age. You're the oak, son. Don't ever let anyone convince you that's not every bit as valuable." He taught me to whittle, to fix small engines, to read the stars, and most importantly, to measure my worth by the depth of my character rather than the volume of applause I received. The teenage years stripped away any pretense of equality in our family. If childhood favoritism had been subtle at times, adolescent favoritism was bold and unmistakable, painted in broad strokes across every family interaction. When Lily turned 16, our parents surprised her with a red Honda Civic, complete with a giant bow, and the whole family gathered for the reveal. I remember the squeals of delight, the tears of joy, the immediate phone calls to friends. The car came with insurance paid for the first year and a gas credit card for emergencies. 4 months later, when I turned 16, I received cake and a card containing $50. "You're so responsible, Michael," my mother said, patting my shoulder. "I'm sure you'll save up for your own car in no time." And save I did. While Lily cruised around town in her Honda, I worked 20 hours a week at Peterson's grocery store, bagging groceries and stocking shelves for $6.50 an hour. After 8 months, I had enough to buy a 1995 Ford pickup with 180,000 miles and a transmission that occasionally forgot what gear it wanted to be in. I loved that truck. Every dent and rattle represented my own sweat and determination. But I'd be lying if I didn't say it didn't sting to watch Lily complain about her car's color while I learned to replace my own brake pads in the driveway. The academic expectations placed on us followed the same pattern. Lily was encouraged to explore her interests, which changed monthly and always required financial investment. She tried horseback riding, photography, drama camp, violin lessons that ended when she decided the instrument was too scratchy. Each new interest was met with enthusiasm and checkbook support. When she announced she wanted to be a fashion designer, my mother immediately enrolled her in weekend workshops and bought her a sewing machine that cost more than I made in 2 months. Meanwhile, my announcement that I wanted to study computer science was met with skepticism. "Computers are just a fad, Michael," my father said. "All that screen time can't be healthy. Why don't you consider something practical, like business?" But I persisted, teaching myself programming from library books and spending lunch money on computer magazines. When I built my first website at 17, a simple page for Peterson's Grocery that actually brought them new customers, my father's only comment was, "Well, I hope you charged them enough to make it worth your time." College represented my great escape, the chance to prove what I was capable of when given the opportunity. I had maintained a 3.8 GPA while working 20 hours a week, earning acceptance to UT Austin's computer science program. The conversation about college funding happened on a Sunday afternoon in the spring of my senior year. I gathered my courage and acceptance letters, ready to discuss my future with my parents. "Mom, Dad," I began, settling into the chair across from them. "I need to talk about college." My father looked up from his paper. "How much is this going to cost us?" "Tuition and room and board would be about $18,000 a year," I said carefully. "I've applied for aid and scholarships, but I'll probably need help." "18,000 a year?" my father interrupted. "Michael, that's $72,000 for 4 years. That's enormous." "I know it's expensive, but computer science graduates have excellent job prospects." "Look, son," my father said, folding his newspaper with deliberate finality. "Your mother and I think you need to be realistic. College is a huge investment, and frankly, we're not sure it's right for everyone. You've got a good job at the grocery store. Mr. Peterson mentioned management opportunities." Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. The words hit me like cold water. "You want me to skip college to work at a grocery store?" "There's nothing wrong with honest work," my mother added softly. "Think of all the debt you'd avoid. Some people just aren't cut out for college." The irony was devastating. These same parents had already started saving for Lily's education, discussing college tours and campus visits for a girl who was 2 years younger and never expressed clear academic interests. That night, I called UT Austin's financial aid office and learned about loans, work-study programs, and every scholarship available. I applied for 17 different awards, took extra shifts at the grocery store, and started selling computer equipment I'd accumulated over the years. My first year at UT was a blur of classes, studying, and work. I had a work-study job in the computer lab, plus weekend shifts at an electronics store. I lived in the cheapest dorm available, survived on peanut butter sandwiches, and watched classmates go home for holidays I couldn't afford to travel for. But I had never been happier. For the first time, I was surrounded by people who valued intelligence and curiosity. My professors appreciated my thoughtful questions. Classmates sought my help with difficult problems. I was finally in an environment where being serious and studious was an asset. During sophomore year, I started freelancing as a web developer building sites for Austin businesses. The work was challenging and paid well enough for me to move off campus and even send money home. Not because my parents needed it, but to prove their lack of faith had been misplaced. The $500 check came back with a note from my mother. "We're proud of how independent you've become, but we don't need your money, honey. Save it for yourself." I kept that return check in my wallet for months, a reminder of the complex dynamics that continued to shape my relationship with family, even as I built a life 300 miles away. It was during my junior year that I met Sophia Ramirez, and everything changed. Not in a lightning strike way, but in the quiet, steady way that real love grows, like a tree putting down roots so deep that nothing can shake them loose. I first saw her at a volunteer event where we were setting up computers for a community center. I was wrestling with a machine that wouldn't boot when I heard a voice say, "Have you tried checking the RAM? Sometimes it comes loose during transport." I looked up to see a young woman with dark hair and a practical ponytail, wearing jeans and a UT engineering shirt, holding a screwdriver and studying the problem with focused intensity. "Good idea," I said, popping open the case. "I'm Michael." "Sophia," she replied, kneeling beside me. "Computer engineering, senior year." That's how it started. Two people who understood the simple pleasure of solving problems, of creating order from chaos through patience and persistence. Our first date was studying together for data structures exams, sharing trail mix and taking turns explaining difficult concepts. It wasn't conventionally romantic, but it was perfect for us. Two serious students who found joy in intellectual challenge. As we grew closer, I discovered that Sophia came from a background that had also taught her self-reliance and hard work. She was the daughter of Mexican immigrants who built a successful restaurant in San Antonio through 16-hour days and unwavering dedication. Her parents had sacrificed enormously so she and her brother could attend college. My parents never had the chance for higher education. They worked so hard so we can have opportunities they never had. I can't imagine taking that for granted. Her words highlighted the fundamental difference between our families. Her parents saw education as a sacred gift. Mine saw it as an avoidable expense. When I finally told Sophia about my family dynamics, the favoritism, the lack of support, the return check, she listened without judgment. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "That must have been incredibly painful." "I've made peace with it," I said, which was mostly true. "Maybe I wouldn't be as driven if things had been different." Sophia took my hand. "You know what I think? You succeeded not because of how they treated you, but in spite of it. And that makes what you've accomplished even more impressive." It was the first time anyone had framed my struggles as evidence of strength rather than evidence of my parents' poor judgment. Coming from someone whose opinion I valued above almost anyone else's, her words felt like healing balm on wounds I hadn't realized were still tender. When I landed my first job offer, a software development position in Dallas with a salary higher than my father had ever made, Sophia was the first person I called. "Michael, that's incredible," she shouted. "I'm so proud of you." My parents' response was characteristically lukewarm. "That's nice, honey. What kind of company again?" "I hope it works out," my father added. "These tech companies can be unstable. Keep your options open." "They don't deserve you," Sophia said when I shared the conversation. "But that's their loss. You're going to do amazing things with or without their support." As we planned our future together, Sophia had accepted an engineering position in Dallas. I realized something profound had shifted. For most of my life, I had sought validation from people determined not to give it. But with Sophia, I found something infinitely more valuable. Someone who saw me clearly, appreciated me fully, and chose to build a life with me not despite my struggles, but because of the strength those struggles had forged. As I sit here now, preparing to marry this remarkable woman, I smile at the 21-year-old who thought he needed his parents' approval to feel worthy. Sophia taught me that meaningful validation doesn't come from people who are supposed to love you unconditionally. It comes from those who choose to love you fully, having seen you at your best and worst, and deciding you're worth the commitment. In a few hours, I will promise to love and honor this woman who became my anchor. And while part of me still hopes my parents will finally see the man I've become, I no longer need their recognition to know my worth. That knowledge, hard-won and deeply rooted, will be my gift to myself on this wedding day. By the time I reached my late 20s, I had built a life that should have made any parent proud. My software development career had flourished beyond even my own expectations. I owned a modest but comfortable home in a quiet Dallas suburb, drove a reliable car that I had paid for in cash, and had savings accounts that represented years of careful planning and disciplined spending. Yet somehow none of these achievements seemed to register with my parents. Family dinners still revolved around Lily's latest ventures, her boutique business that struggled to turn a profit despite continuous infusions of parental funding, her social media presence that she was convinced would make her an influencer, her revolving door of romantic relationships that each promised to be the one until they inevitably weren't.
I remember one particularly painful dinner when I had just received a promotion that came with both a significant salary increase and the opportunity to lead my own development team. I was 26, managing a group of programmers older and more experienced than myself, and I felt genuinely proud of what I had accomplished. "That's wonderful, Michael," my mother said when I shared the news, her smile warm but fleeting before her attention turned to Lily. "Lily, honey, tell us about the new partnership you mentioned." And just like that, my moment was over. Lily launched into a detailed explanation of her plan to collaborate with another struggling boutique owner, a venture that would require my parents to co-sign yet another business loan. The conversation that followed was filled with strategic discussions, financial planning, and the kind of engaged parental support that I had learned to stop expecting for myself. I sat there, eating my mother's pot roast, and listening to my family plan Lily's future with the same careful attention they had never given to mine. It struck me that even in success, I remained somehow invisible to them, as if my achievements existed in a parallel universe that didn't quite intersect with their reality. The most painful part wasn't the lack of recognition. I had made peace with that years earlier. It was watching my mother's guilty glances in my direction, the way she would sometimes reach across the table to pat my hand or ask about my work with an intensity that felt forced and compensatory. She knew, I realized. She understood the imbalance in their treatment, felt the weight of it, but seemed powerless to change patterns that had been carved into our family dynamic over decades. After dinner, as I helped clear the dishes, my mother pulled me aside in the kitchen. "I'm really proud of you, Michael," she said quietly, her voice carrying a heaviness that spoke of years of unspoken regret. "I hope you know that. Your father and I, we worry about you sometimes. You're so independent, so capable. I guess we assumed you didn't need as much from us." I wanted to tell her that independence hadn't been a choice but a necessity, that capability had been forged in the fires of neglect rather than nurtured by support. Instead, I hugged her and said, "I know, Mom. I'm okay." Because what else could I say? That I had spent my entire life learning to be okay without them? That their assumptions about my self-sufficiency had become a self-fulfilling prophecy born of emotional survival rather than natural temperament. As I drove home that night, I reflected on the strange irony of my situation. I had achieved everything I had ever dreamed of, and more. I was financially secure, professionally respected, personally fulfilled in ways that many people never experience. Yet there remained this hollow space where parental pride should have lived, an absence that no amount of external success could quite fill. The months leading up to my wedding to Sophia were a study in contrasts. While we threw ourselves into planning what we hoped would be a celebration of love and new beginnings, my family's involvement served as a constant reminder of the dynamics that had shaped my entire life. From the moment we announced our engagement, it became clear that even my wedding would become another stage for the familiar drama of favoritism and neglect. My parents were pleased, certainly. They liked Sophia and approved of our relationship in the abstract way that people approve of sensible decisions made by responsible adults. But their emotional investment felt perfunctory, polite rather than passionate. The contrast became most obvious during the planning process. When we discussed the guest list, my mother spent considerable energy ensuring that all of Lily's friends would be accommodated, even though many of them barely knew me. When we talked about seating arrangements, the primary concern was Lily's comfort and her ability to socialize freely throughout the reception. "Lily's been through such a difficult time with the boutique struggling," my mother explained when I questioned why my sister's social needs seemed to be driving so many of our wedding decisions.
I think this celebration will be good for her spirits. I found myself wondering when my wedding had become therapy for my sister's business disappointments, but I said nothing. Sophia, however, was less diplomatic. "It's your wedding, Michael," she said after a particularly frustrating planning session where my preferences had been systematically overruled in favor of accommodating Lily's various requests. "Not a charity event for your sister's emotional well-being." But Sophia also understood something that had taken me years to learn, that fighting these battles directly would only create more drama and detract from what was supposed to be our special day. Instead, she began making subtle suggestions and asking pointed questions that gradually steered the planning back toward what we actually wanted. "I think Michael would really love to have the ceremony outdoors," she would say, when my mother suggested an indoor venue that would be more convenient for Lily's high heels. "He's always talked about how much he loves being surrounded by nature." It was true. I had always found peace in natural settings, a preference that traced back to those childhood weekends with Grandpa William. Gradually, through Sophia's gentle persistence and my own occasional assertions, our wedding began to take shape as something that reflected who we were, rather than who my family expected us to be. The rehearsal dinner, held the night before the wedding at a small restaurant in town, provided a preview of the tensions that would define the next day. My father's toast was brief and generic, touching on responsibility and commitment in the abstract terms that politicians use when discussing issues they don't really understand. Lily's maid of honor speech, delivered despite the fact that Sophia's sister, Maria, was actually serving in that role, somehow managed to make the evening about her own romantic struggles and personal growth journey. She spoke eloquently about watching me finally find someone who appreciated my quiet strength, but the subtext was clear. She was the star, reflecting on her supporting players' unexpected success. I caught Sophia's eye during Lily's speech and saw a flicker of something that might have been anger before her expression settled back into gracious composure. Later, as we walked to our cars, she took my hand and squeezed it gently. "Tomorrow's going to be different," she said. And there was something in her voice, a quiet confidence, almost a promise, that made me think she knew something I didn't. The morning of my wedding dawned clear and bright, with the kind of perfect Texas weather that makes you believe the universe is conspiring in your favor. As I stood at the altar in the rustic outdoor venue we had chosen, surrounded by towering oak trees and the gentle sounds of nature, I felt a peace settle over me that had nothing to do with my family's approval or disapproval. The guests began arriving early, friends from college and work colleagues who had become like family over the years. I watched them take their seats, these people who had chosen to be part of my life story, and felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the morning sun. My parents arrived with appropriate punctuality, my father in his best suit, and my mother wearing a dress she had spent weeks selecting. They took their seats in the front row with a kind of formal dignity that people adopt for occasions they consider important but not necessarily joyful. Lily arrived fashionably late, of course, making an entrance that drew attention from the gathering crowd despite the fact that this was supposed to be someone else's day. As the music began and I took my position at the altar, I found myself thinking about all the paths that had led to this moment. Every rejection, every overlooked achievement, every time I had been made to feel small or insufficient, all of it had somehow conspired to bring me to this place, to this woman, to this life that I had built through my own determination and choices. When Sophia appeared at the end of the aisle, radiant in a simple dress that somehow managed to be both elegant and perfectly her, I felt my breath catch in my throat. She walked toward me with confident steps, her eyes locked on mine, and I realized that this was what belonging felt like. Not the desperate seeking of approval from people determined not to give it, but the quiet recognition that passes between two souls who have chosen each other. Our vows were personal and heartfelt, promises built on years of knowing each other in both triumph and struggle. When I spoke about finding home in another person, about learning that family is something you build rather than something you're born into, I felt the words resonate through the gathering like stones dropped into still water. I caught sight of my mother during the ceremony, and for the first time in years, I saw genuine emotion in her eyes. She was crying, not the Paulette tears that people shed at weddings because they're supposed to, but the deep, cathartic tears of someone finally acknowledging a truth they had been avoiding for too long. My father's expression was harder to read. He sat straight and formal, his face composed in the neutral mask he wore for occasions that required his presence, but not necessarily his emotional participation. Yet there was something in his posture, a tension, that suggested he was working harder than usual to maintain his detachment. After we were pronounced husband and wife and had shared our first kiss as a married couple, the reception began with the kind of relaxed joy that comes when people gather to celebrate something genuinely worth celebrating. The food was delicious, the music was perfect, and for the first time in my life, I was at the center of a family event that felt truly focused on me and what I had accomplished. It was during the speeches that Sophia stood up, her champagne glass in hand, and asked for everyone's attention. I assumed she was going to offer a toast of gratitude to our guests, but instead, she reached into her purse and pulled out an envelope that looked aged and worn.
"Before we go any further with tonight's celebration," she said, her voice carrying clearly across the gathering, "there's something that Michael needs to hear, something that I've been keeping safe for the right moment." She handed me the envelope, and I recognized the handwriting immediately. It was from Grandpa William, written in the careful script he had used for important documents and special occasions. The envelope was addressed to me, but it had clearly been sealed for years. "Your grandfather gave this to me 6 months before he passed away," Sophia explained to the now silent gathering. "He made me promise to save it for your wedding day. He said there were things you needed to know, things that would matter most when you were starting your own family." My hands trembled slightly as I opened the envelope and unfolded the letter inside. Grandpa William's words, written in his distinctive, careful handwriting, seemed to glow in the soft lighting of the reception tent. "My dear Michael," I read aloud, my voice stronger than I had expected it to be. "If Sophia is reading this to you, then you have found the love and partnership that I always knew you deserved. I am writing this because there are things you need to know about your place in this family, things that your parents have never been able to say, but that need to be said nonetheless." I paused, looking up at my parents, who sat frozen in their chairs. My father's composed mask had slipped entirely, revealing something that looked like shame mixed with recognition. My mother was crying openly now, her hands pressed to her mouth. I continued reading. "You have always been the strongest of us, Michael. Not the loudest or the most charming, but the strongest where it matters most, in your character, in your determination, in your ability to build something meaningful from nothing. I have watched you grow into a man who doesn't need anyone's permission to be worthy, and that is the greatest gift any grandfather could hope to witness." The letter went on to detail things that Grandpa William had observed over the years: my resilience in the face of family neglect, my quiet determination to succeed on my own terms, my fundamental decency in situations that would have made lesser people bitter or cruel. But it was the final paragraph that broke something open in the gathering, something that had been held tight for far too long. "To your parents, who I know are listening to this, I want you to understand what you have had in your home all these years. Michael is not just your son, he is your legacy, the proof that you raised a man who can stand on his own and build something beautiful from whatever materials life provides. Stop looking so hard at the child who glitters that you miss the one who glows.
Some lights are meant to be seen from a distance, over time, in the quiet moments when flashier displays have faded. The reception fell completely silent. Even Lily, who had been checking her phone periodically throughout the evening, sat motionless, her face pale with something that might have been understanding or shame or both. It was my father who broke the silence, standing slowly and walking toward me with unsteady steps. For a moment I thought he might speak, might finally find words for the acknowledgement that had been withheld for nearly 30 years. Instead, he simply pulled me into an embrace that felt different from any we had shared before. Not the perfunctory hugs of obligated family gatherings, but the fierce, desperate grip of a man finally admitting to himself the magnitude of what he had almost lost. The hours that followed the reading of Grandpa William's letter passed in a blur of conversations that felt both long overdue and surprisingly natural. My father and I didn't speak in grand declarations or dramatic apologies. Instead, we found ourselves talking about work, about the challenges of building something lasting, about the pride he felt but had never known how to express.
"I always thought you didn't need us," he said, as we stood together near the edge of the reception area, watching Sophia dance with her father to a slow song that spoke of generations of love passed down like heirlooms. "You were so self-sufficient, so determined. I guess I convinced myself that getting involved would just be interference." "I needed you," I said simply. "I just learned not to expect you." It wasn't a complete reconciliation. Decades of patterns don't shift in a single evening, but it was a beginning. For the first time in my life, I felt like my father was seeing me clearly, not as a reflection of his own fears or expectations, but as the man I had actually become. My mother's approach was different, but equally meaningful. She spent the evening making rounds to my friends and colleagues, listening to their stories about who I was in the world beyond our family. I watched her face change as she heard tale after tale of my reliability, my kindness, my professional competence, my loyalty as a friend. "I'm sorry," she whispered to me later as the reception was winding down. "I'm sorry we made you feel invisible. I'm sorry we missed so much." Even Lily surprised me. As Sophia and I prepared to leave for our honeymoon, my sister approached with tears in her eyes and an expression I had never seen before. Genuine humility mixed with something that looked like admiration. "I never realized," she said quietly, "I never understood how hard it must have been, watching me get everything handed to me while you had to fight for every bit of recognition. You're incredible, Michael. You always were, and I was too selfish to see it." But perhaps the most meaningful moment came as Sophia and I danced our last dance of the evening. As we swayed together under the string lights that transformed our reception into something magical, she smiled up at me with the kind of joy that comes from watching someone you love finally receive what they've always deserved. "How does it feel?" she asked, "finally being seen by them?" I considered her question, thinking about the letter, the conversations, the tears and embraces and long overdue acknowledgments. "Good," I said finally, "but not necessary. Not anymore." And that was the truth. Grandpa William's letter hadn't given me permission to feel worthy. I had learned that lesson through years of building a life on my own terms. Instead, it had given my family permission to finally see what had been there all along. As we drove away from the reception, rice and rose petals still clinging to our hair, I reflected on the strange journey that had brought us to this point. I had spent most of my life seeking validation from people who seemed determined not to give it, only to discover that the most meaningful recognition comes not from those who are supposed to love you unconditionally, but from those who choose to love you fully, having seen you at your best and your worst, and deciding you're worth the commitment.
My parents' belated acknowledgement was gratifying, certainly, but it wasn't transformative. The transformation had happened years earlier, in college libraries and late-night coding sessions, in conversations with Sophia and quiet moments of self-realization. I had learned to define my own worth, to build my own legacy, to create family out of choice rather than obligation. The true gift of that wedding day wasn't my parents finally seeing me clearly. It was the recognition that I no longer needed them to. I had found my place in the world, built my own foundation, created my own definition of success. Their approval was a nice addition to that structure, but it was no longer load-bearing. As Sophia and I began our married life together, I carried with me the knowledge that legacy isn't something you inherit, it's something you create. One choice at a time, one relationship at a time, one act of love and determination at a time. And in that truth, I found a peace that no amount of parental favoritism could have given me, and no amount of parental neglect could take away. The boy who had once stood in the shadow of his sister's spotlight had grown into a man who made his own light, and that illumination was more than bright enough to guide him home. Up next, we have 2 more incredible stories that are waiting for you. Just click the image you want to watch and it will take you there. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe. It would mean a lot.